Hello, this is the last video from our last meeting of the Engaged Teaching series at Chatt State from March 3rd. So this is just a quick recap of the things that we discussed in our last meeting. So, of course, we began with our map that has been guiding our practice this academic year. We're in the last module series of the Engaged Teaching series group, talking about engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning. So we began by talking about revisiting the different topics we've discussed in the course of the year, and then delved right into our agenda. And per usual, we started with the what of our engaged teaching model. And this week it's about the scholarship of teaching and learning, or SoTL. And then the what and how is grouped together. And how do we engage in SoTL? What is some research around SoTL? And then we ended off our discussion talking about what we want to do next. What are some offerings of professional development we would like to see in CARE in the coming weeks to build upon what we have learned in the engaged teaching model? So we, of course, started with an acknowledgement of the two authors or creators of the engaged teaching model, Elizabeth Barkley and Claire Harrell Major. And this quote that says, SoTL is a systematic investigation of teaching and learning to advance the practice of teaching by making inquiry findings published so they can be extended to other centers. So we talked about it is in that piece of sharing what we have learned with others that makes SoTL the strongest. So we talked about SoTL being when we share our good works. And the group, we talked about the different ways in which we share our scholarship of teaching and learning. And at Chatt State, one way that we do that is with our portfolio, our annual portfolio, but we also talked about sharing how we share what we've learned about teaching at conferences, in posts that we make, blog posts, podcasts with other colleagues, and that how when we go beyond just trying something out and seeing how it works ourselves, in any other way where we're sharing that experience, that's when we're getting to that dissemination page part. So it doesn't need to be a fancy peer-reviewed public article for it to be considered dissemination. We're talking about ways in which thinking in terms of open education resources, all the ways that we can share information, including with our colleagues. So we talked about the SoTL cycle and how if you Google SoTL, tons of different diagrams come up. I like this particular one that I adapted from Tricia Poole. But really, the scholarship of teaching and learning begins with identifying the challenge. What is happening in your classroom that you would like to have happen differently? And then determine an approach using literature. And what that means is, if I want to study something, I'll look into it first. So we used our new 7-week sessions as a possible challenge. So our classes are now in 7-week sessions. Maybe we see a challenge where we're not sure we're reaching the students with the information they need in this shorter session. So determining an approach using literature might mean me seeking out articles, podcasts, videos, discussion board posts about the ways some faculty and schools have approached this 7-week or short session schedule. And what are some things that they tried and did differently to make that work? Then after I've done some exploring and learning from others, I'm going to implement my work. So scholarly work builds off the work of others. I need to look out there to see what other people have done who have experienced this similar situation, and then choose a way that I want to implement it in my classroom. So perhaps I'm overwhelmed with the amount of grading that I am doing in a 7-week session. and I want to explore different types of grading. So if I were to implement an approach, maybe I might try specifications grading, where students have a cafe of choices of what they want to do for grading, and that narrows the scope of what it is that I will be doing in terms of grading and still giving them feedback. Then I'm going to evaluate the impacts of the grading. Did the specifications grading model work the way I wanted it to? Maybe it did, or maybe I want to make some adjustments. And that it's at this stage that we review and refine and decide if, hey, my specifications grading had more of my students chose the C option of choosing things. I want to push them closer to an A or B. So maybe I'm going to change my categories of assignments so that students are able to have more choices and perform at a higher rate based on their understanding of the material. And then I'm going to disseminate my findings. I'm going to share it with a colleague at a faculty meeting, in a post on LinkedIn. I might write a blog post for my an association that I belong to. I might present it at a conference. Heck, I might even write a peer-reviewed article about the study that I did. But getting that information out there for the benefit of others is a key piece of SoTL. So knowing that this cycle of SoTL, embedded in this is reflection. And we've talked about reflections in our other meetings, but being along the way, reflecting on what it is that I want to accomplish, what I have learned, how I'll implement it, evaluate it, and share it with others. Reflection is a key piece throughout. So then we shared an example. So I wanted to share a SoTL example from a colleague and friend, Shushi. So we looked at her molecular CaseNet website, and there's a link to it in the slide. And this is her model for her research, where she's looking at the intersection of biology and chemistry, students coming into her courses with knowledge and chemistry and biology, and using case study as an engaging way to bring students into the work. And so there's a link to her website. And then on this slide, there's a link to her website and a short video on YouTube, which describes her process. And this is the homepage of the Molecular CaseNet website. And all of the materials there are OER. All of the materials are case studies at the intersection of biology and chemistry, and once they would in other areas too, mathematics, quantitative skills. And we took a little bit of time in our group today to explore. So we just visited the website, turned our cameras off, turned our microphones off, explored for a few minutes so we can engage in the videos, and then came back to the main Zoom room and talked about what is it that we think Shushi was wanting to accomplish in this study? What is it that we wanted students to learn more about? What might have been the challenge that prompted her to think about this case study model? And we talked about how she's studied case studies and what they are and the benefits to student learning in the design of her molecular CaseNet. So we had a great discussion around that. And again, we talked about how the development of this molecular CaseNet of OER case study materials are being developed by both her and her colleagues and students, and how that fits into the SoTL cycle. And we talked specifically about open education resources again, which this is. Then we spent some time talking about how publications in the topic of SoTL has increased over time. So the number of articles published in the United States around SoTL has increased. So we have data up through 2020. So these are articles specifically about the teaching how and why. And there's a quote that I shared. SoTL involves communicating and disseminating about the teaching and learning practices of one's subject. It also entails investigating questions related to how students learn within a discipline. So if I'm a math teacher, how do students learn best? How do students learn best in general, but how do students learn best in math? What in what ways can I study something and solve a problem for my students in a way that helps them learn more. And then we talked about SoTL types, and they generally fall into these categories. So when writing about or describing or publishing about SoTL, some of the things in these publication lists on the previous slide are about personal accounts of change. So here's what I did with my students, and here's what happened when I tried this method, this tool. Others are recommended practice reports. So, hey, I recommend having discussion because discussion helps students stay engaged, let's just say. And then there are similarly recommended content reports. So this could be something like, I teach math, and I learned through this study that when the problems are real world based, and my students have the opportunity to think about it in terms of a story, like a case study, they're further engaged. And then there are also personal narratives. Personal narratives are the way in which you yourself view your teaching having changed or grown over time. The difference between a personal account of change is you've implemented something and you are talking about the change. And personal narrative is something like your teaching philosophy. How has that changed for you as a result of your years in teaching or as a result of an experience that you've had? Okay, then there's different types of ways that this information in these 4 SoTL types in articles and literature are analyzed. And I would argue there's more here too as well. So sometimes it's descriptive research, which is describing what has happened and the impacts. Sometimes it's heavier on quantitative investigations. So I'm going to implement a new curriculum, and I'm going to measure in the past what students' understanding are, or I'm going to pre-assess them, and here's what I learned from the post-assessment. Sometimes they're qualitative studies, so I'm going to ask students to reflect on the experience of perhaps participating in this case study. What did they learn about themselves? What did they learn about real-world problem solving? This might be a focus group, an interview, open-ended responses on a survey or course evaluation. And then there are, of course, personal reflection. So these are ways of analyzing information that you have reflected upon. Maybe you kept a reflection journal throughout the implementation. And of course, you can combine these. I'm a mixed methods researcher, so immediately my mind goes to the ways in which all of these things fit together. Okay, so then we talked about what I call the beach house idea. When we think about SoTL, we're thinking about how is what I am doing solving a problem? How am I disseminating it? And can I say that what I am doing is impacting students' learning? So for example, if I were to say that students are more successful in a 7-week session, that is fantastic. How can I be sure that it isn't a combination of things that I am doing differently? So I think if we could be for sure saying that something that we have done increases student outcomes every time, we would be very wealthy. We could have a beautiful house on the beach, but we know there are other variables that come into place, and we need to take those into account too in our reflection, but also in our analysis and reporting. So if we make a change or implement something new, for example, 7-week sessions, we have found that it increases students' retention, which is absolutely fantastic. We might even be able to say that it increases student learning, but there are other variables at play. All of our faculty are learning new ways of streamlining their courses and having authentic assessments that could also be increasing student learning. So when we talk about SoTL, sometimes we'll read articles that say that this particular implementation increased student learning. It's important to be cautious to think about the many ways in which we can increase student learning so that we are careful to acknowledge the many facets of student learning. And so, of course, we want to increase student learning, but we also want to discuss all the variables at play when changes are made. And then we had a great discussion around this and what we might do to be able to have this beach house idea. And then we ended off our time together by taking a look at our map again and discussing future professional development, things that we have learned as being a part of this Engaged Teaching Model series that we would like to delve further into. So I have collected all of those ideas and look for future professional development in those areas. So thank you very much, and I hope you will continue to engage with CARE in the future. Thank you.